So welcome to our very first ever virtual Mother of All Pottery sales. It is the first time we are going virtual, so it is the most virtual we have ever been. Today, for the majority of the talk, if you could keep yourself on mute so we cut down on any background noise, that would be helpful. But if you have a question or a comment, we would invite you to either unmute yourself and ask, or if you'd rather not speak on a Zoom, you can put it into the chat box. I'll keep my eye on it while Carina is working and voice any of those comments and questions so that she can stay focused on her demo. So I am Michelle Kless. I'm the Deputy Director here at Union Project. Union Project is a nonprofit arts organization in Pittsburgh, and we have served the community in a lot of different ways. Since we were originally founded in 2001, we have restored 155 original stained glass windows. We've created space for community events and celebrations. And of course, we have managed the renovation and ongoing maintenance of our historic, more than 100 years old building. Today, the biggest program focus we have is ceramics through our classes and our workshops, our group programs, our kiln rental, and our membership program. The ceramic studio housed in our building offers opportunities for people of all ages, of all skill levels, of all interest levels, chances to learn and create in clay. Every year we have a massive clay celebration, the Mother of All Pottery sales. It brings out more than 1,000 people. They come to watch demonstrations, they do hands-on clay activities, and of course they buy ceramic work from the artists who set up and exhibit and sell in the Great Hall. Of course, in 2020, the Mother of All Pottery sales had to be canceled. When 2021 rolled around, we weren't ready, our artists weren't ready, and we felt like our community wasn't ready to be in person again, but we weren't really wanting to pause the celebration for another year. So we put together this virtual slate of programming for the Mother of All Pottery sales. We have 6 demonstrations and artist talks throughout the course of 9 days, as well as an online shop where you can purchase local pottery made by local artists and for local pickup only. And of course, our demonstrating artist today, Carina, is one of the artists featured on that shop. I would strongly encourage you to go check out her vases and earrings. They are stunning. This event, the Mother of All Pottery sales, is made possible with really generous support from sponsors and foundations. We are very grateful to the Fine Foundation, to Bridgeway Capital, the Creative Business Accelerator, Simpson and McCready, and Standard Ceramics. Union Project, the organization, is also supported in part by the Allegheny Regional Asset District. So thank you very much to them. I'm so pleased to introduce our next demonstrating artist, Carina, because she is a joy and delight and a great friend of Union Project Studio. Carina is a Pittsburgh-based potter and a member of Union Project Studio. We've tried recently to figure out when she joined the studio. The answer is basically a long time ago. 8 to 10 years, probably. We could go with that. So in addition to that, she also works at the Children's Museum managing the art studio, and she teaches ceramics at Union Project. While she's not making work in our studio, she's in her home studio where she is today. So Carina, thank you for being here with us and for inviting us into your kitchen. We really appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited. Hello, thank you for being here. Welcome to my dining room is where I am right now. As Michelle mentioned, I'm a member of the co-op at Union Project, and I also work out of my own home and do a lot of sort of back and forth. So you can see my kitchen behind me. I'm sort of spread out along my dining room table right now. So you'll have to bear with me a little bit as we probably will do some shuffling over the next hour or so. I'm going to be sharing some different surface design techniques that I use in my own work. And usually when I'm working, I have one process spread out at a time. There isn't really room for all the processes to be set up at once. So I might have to, go grab something from the far reaching other end of my table and come back. And I also don't have anyone sort of following me with the camera. So I'll switch in a second to my above camera so you can see my hands. But if at any point you are not getting a good view of what's happening, just wave your hands or unmute yourself and we'll do what we can to adjust also. But at any rate, welcome. When Michelle asked me if I wanted to do a demonstration of some sort, I was really excited about it, and also sort of thinking about what sort of topic I might want to talk about. And we were chatting and landed on surface design, because really that's a lot of what I like to do. I do a lot of different kinds of ways that my ceramics is embellished with some printing as well as various textures. It's a little hard to pick up on Zoom sometimes. So I'm going to share a couple techniques that I have sort of been in my tool belt for a while, and maybe some others that I'm working on are still in development a little bit. I think a lot of the fun of ceramics is the ability to keep playing and experimenting over time. I got into ceramics, it's probably been about 15 years now, and it took me sort of a while to land in where I am now, and obviously that's always changing. But when I was in school, I fell into ceramics kind of by accident. I was in school for painting, and found that while I enjoyed painting as a hobby in my own time, it was a really stressful place to be in the School of Art where I was. And so I was about to throw in the towel on art completely, and then thought, well, why don't you, what's the most opposite art thing from painting that you can think of? And I was like, oh, I'll try a ceramics class. We'll just see. And it really resonated with me. But then at the end of the day, I find myself, my favorite part of the ceramics is the surface decoration. I do a lot of painting on pots. So it is kind of full circle in a lot of ways. A lot of my pots are pretty simple in form, pretty simple cylinders. I'm thinking a lot about how they feel in your hand, but they are pretty straight-sided pieces, because I am really creating sort of a canvas that I can play on after that pot is made. So kind of an interesting turn of events to get back to kind of the beginning. But I think I'm going to start. Actually, before I do, I also did want to reiterate what Michelle said about feeling very free to just unmute yourself and ask a question if you want. I understand that that can be uncomfortable, and you can use the chats for sure, but I work full-time at the Children's Museum. Most of my time using Zoom is with kids, where I'm used to hearing all of their reactions and thoughts in the moment. And so that does not bother me at all if you want to unmute yourself. But maybe we'll start with some mono printing, this thing, right? This sort of printed texture stuff here. This was kind of my first dabbling in what I can do on a surface to make it a little more interesting in my own. I was really having fun with the black and white aesthetic. We had a house fire a long time ago, and through all of the hard stuff about it, I found myself super fascinated by the marks that the smoke left on our walls, and just that kind of aesthetic and color schemes. And so that's sort of where I first started tinkering with it. But Michelle, if you want to switch to yeah, there we go. And I'm gonna just pull out. So yesterday I threw a bunch of pots so that they would be ready for decorating today. So I've got a cylinder here. It will be a future mug. And I like to work often on a towel so that I can lay my pots on their side and they don't get smushed. I'm just gonna make a little bed for it so I can set it here without it rolling around at all. When I'm messing around with this printing technique, I like to have a deposit leather hard, or for those of you who are not potters, I call it like the cheddar cheese moment in clay, when it's like wet enough that you could still squish it, but it really holds its shape pretty well. So a lot of what I like about this technique is that I can really capture the brush strokes. Pull out this guy for a second. Plate up here. I really like, if I paint directly on the pot, you'll lose all of that sort of visual texture. So instead of painting right on the pot, I'm painting on paper and then transferring it. It's like a mono print of sort. So I kind of enjoy some, yeah.
You want to tell folks a little bit more about what a monoprint is?
Oh yeah, that's a good point. So the term monoprint is basically just a general umbrella term for a whole family of printing. And it's a type of printing where you can't make identical repetitions. So silkscreen printing is not a monoprint, because you could make a design and then make like 500 t-shirts that all match. A monoprint is often a little more painterly. You're often painting something on a surface and then transferring it to a paper or to whatever your final product is. And you could do that same painting again and transfer another one. But if you can't make two perfectly identical paintings by hand, then you're not going to make two identical monoprints. So you could get similar things over time, but each one is sort of an individual print. So like this guy, I'm going to do something kind of like this. I just sort of like some sort of leaf-esque prints. So you can sort of see, I'm going to be painting on this and transferring it here, and then transferring a second one here. And it'll all sort of capture those brush strokes in there. And I could do that again on another mug, but I would have to cut out new leaves, paint them again, and it wouldn't be exactly the same twice. Does that answer your question? Good point. Also, because I really like capturing the brush strokes, I end up using like the cheapoest brushes that you can find. I've got like a IKEA paintbrush and like a Crayola type paintbrush. Nice brushes often have really soft bristles that are going to hide your brush strokes a little bit. And I also have some of those for other things. But for this, I'm kind of seeking out the really rough, there you can see it's even like a little bit splayed out. And I'm going to use them dry, because if I use them wet, it's going to make for a smoother stroke. So I'm using Amico underglazes for my prints and for actually most of my work. This is what I like to use for the coloring. All right, let's see here. So I'm just going to go in and cover this. And I'm going to try, often at the base here, I get like a bit of a puddle. I'm going to try to smooth that all out. Pick this up here. You can, I don't know if you'll be able to see, you can sort of see some of those brush strokes in there a little bit. I'm actually often will let it sort of set for just like 10 seconds or so that some places are wetter than other places where you get those grooves. And this can take just a little bit of, you know, getting the hang of to find just like the right spot, the amount of wetness. But part of the reason that I like working at this like leather hard stage when the clay is still kind of wet is the paper will stick to it. So you don't have to worry about it like peeling off right away. You can really get it, put some pressure on there. I'm just gonna leave it there till I do my other one. Because if I accidentally mess up and get like a black splotch out here, I can wipe it off, and it's easier to wipe it off if I I'm not worried about wiping off the part that I want to save. Do the same thing on this other bigger guy. So as I was kind of messing around with these sort of black and white schemes way at the very beginning, the way that I got into this, so monoprinting is not like something that I invented to do on clay. There's a lot of artists who do it, but as Michelle mentioned, I work at the Children's Museum, and I find a lot of inspiration of watching the way that kids work and kids experiment, because they're a lot less worried, I think, often than we are about how things are going to turn out, or if you're doing it the right way. And we were playing around with monoprinting at the studio at the museum, and was just like having a really good time seeing all of the brush strokes and the results that kids were getting. And so I started experimenting with it at home for that reason, just taking some inspiration from what I was watching the kiddos do. All right. A little pressure on this one too.
So Carina, it looks like where some ceramic artists might grab a rubber or metal rib to really smooth that out, you're just using your finger. And I'm wondering if you're not that worried about having a smooth pressure on it because you're looking for that variation of surface.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's partly that, and it's partly that a rubber rib, if it moves outside of this line, it's going to sort of disrupt the sort of texture of the rest of the pot a little bit. And because I'm not super worried about it being perfectly even, just kind of putting pressure right there. I'm going to grab somewhere I put, oh yeah, a little towel. Do need to sort of work with kind of clean hands, so this clay that I'm working with, it's a white porcelain, so I try not to have black marks outside of where I want them, or it'll be pretty visible. I also, let's see, before I peel them off, I've got a little damp sponge here. You probably cannot see in the camera, but sometimes when I'm rubbing it down, I'll get like little splotches just outside of it. So I'm just gonna do a tiny cleanup in a couple spots. There we go. The nice thing about this too is that, especially at this stage, if I peel off a leaf and it's like not as distinct as I want it to be, I can take a damp sponge to it, wipe off that leaf, and just do it again. There's nothing about this that's like a one shot. If you don't like it, too bad. So I'm just gonna use this needle tool just to catch the edge here. Let's see what we've got. Oh, there we go. There's one. I think I mentioned that I was using computer paper. Maybe I did mention. I'm using computer paper for this. It's not the only kind of paper that works, but I do find that it needs to be something absorbent. You don't want something glossy. There's the other one. You want something that's gonna suck in a little bit of the moisture from the underglaze. Otherwise, it won't, that moment when I was letting it dry for like a couple seconds to get the variation in the lines, you're not gonna get that if you are doing this on like a plastic sheet or something. So computer paper works well, butcher paper, newsprint, anything like that. I'm gonna clean off my hands for a second. One thing that I'll mention, if we have time at the end of this, maybe I'll do a handle demo. I know it can be nice to see how people do handles, so I'll set that aside for a second. But I prefer mostly personally to work in black and white, but you can do this kind of thing with any colors. So this is something that I did just for a demo recently with other colors, and you can do all kinds of things. So it's kind of a fun technique that just is going to get that sort of like brushy look that I appreciate. Oh, here's a thing that I find kind of funny. So I like the sort of leaf floral-ish sort of designs quite a bit, but people read lots of different things into visuals, especially when they're not super explicit. And I think that's totally fine. I was at I think it was at the Arts Festival in Pittsburgh 2 years ago, and someone walked by my booth and was just like, aliens, huh? You like aliens? And like off he went. And I was like, I like thought about that for like several minutes, trying to, and by several minutes, I mean a couple hours, trying to figure out what the heck he was talking about. And then I took another look at my pots and I realized that I think, you know, those like aliens that have the like big green head and then like the slanty black eyes. Do you see that now? And I think that he was reading this as like two alien eyes and thought that like all of my theme and my whole art, everything was like an alien motif, which is not what I was going for, but I don't mind that. You know, different people are gonna see different things in it, and that just like really made me laugh, but in a way that I thought, you know, like if someone buys this because they think it's the only time they've seen aliens represented in pottery, I'm not going to complain about that. That's fine by me. So there's that. I am going to also pull out a plate and do a bigger one, because I think sometimes the plates and even like larger platters can be fun because you can play with the same technique but go in with more layers and kind of play with it a little bit more. Just gonna wipe this off really quick. While I'm thinking about it, just because I'm wiping it off right now, often people ask me if there's anything special about this surface that I'm working on, because it is just I'm like a cutting mat on a cutting mat. I'm gonna grab my plate really fast. But this green cutting mat that I'm working on I just found it at a Goodwill, but it's a cutting mat that has like a really, I'm shaking the table. It's just got a really matte surface, and so the clay doesn't stick to it like it would to a normal, like this is a shiny cutting mat. Clay would stick to this really badly, but I just find when I'm working from my house, it's a nice small work surface to use. All right, so this is a future plate right here. It's just a slab that I rolled out, cut out into a circle. You can see how much it shrinks by the size of this plate compared to it. And I'm gonna maybe mess around with a similar thing, but I'm just gonna go a little bigger. And when I'm working bigger, I like to sometimes mess around with a little more gradient using some like gray as well. Just give it a little bit more variation. All right, while I'm unearthing my big paper, does anyone have any questions about this process? Here we go. All right, I'm gonna go with a bigger piece of paper here. So one thing that I really enjoy doing is just thinking about this in layers a little bit more. I'll go in with some maybe bigger leaves. Unlike when I was working on the mug, it was already in its form before I was decorating it. This piece, I find that if on like a curved plate surface, it can be hard to lay things out nicely. So I'm gonna do all the decoration on this flat slab of clay. And then once the underglaze has dried so that it won't smudge, then I'm gonna drape it over a form that I have to get the plate shape afterwards. All right, I'll do like a little something. And I think this paper is wide enough, so I'm just gonna rip up a couple of strips here. We're gonna kind of improvise a little bit together. I'm gonna put these leaves down first. Right, just do same thing as before. A couple of them at least. This little needle tool is always really useful for just grabbing underneath so I don't smudge everything with my fingers. Do one there. And maybe I'll paint two and I'll leave one white. Leave one blank. You can maybe gather from the way that I approach this that I am not terribly concerned about every plate that I make and sell being an identical match, but I enjoy having plates that and mugs that, you know, go together. If you're trying to build a set, they go together nicely, but that each one's a little different. I think it's fun to sort of find the plate that's the one that speaks to you specifically. All right, I'm gonna leave this one just without anything on it, I think. I'm gonna switch to my bigger brush. Right. I think it can be nice to have a couple brushes because if you're switching between colors, you know, if I'm going to go from this black to a gray, for example, I don't like washing off the brush because then it gets really wet and it doesn't give me the same look. I'm going to let that one dry for a second. I'm going to grab my gray. A lot of my underglazes are in jars because I mix a lot of my own colors to have like the shades that I like. Some gray going, get some kind of brushy bits. All right, this one's probably ready to go. I'm gonna do right there. There. And Michelle, like you were mentioning before, I'm not going in with a rubber rib on this stuff either. I'm just using the pressure of my hands. Whoop, I'm really shaking things a little bit. Try to rub with a little bit more calm. But the nice thing about this, I feel like you can approach this a little bit like painting, where if you pull this off and you don't like the way that it looks or it feels incomplete in some way, you can fiddle around with adding another layer. Sometimes yeah. And I like that I can see like little streaks of black. I did not rinse my brush between. This would matter more if I was really changing colors, but since I'm just going from black to gray, I don't mind if a little more black gets in my gray. Whoop. I don't want that pulled off quite yet, just in case I'm not done. So personally, I think that I would love for this to be like blended a little bit more. So I'm gonna go back with 1/3 little layer before I take off the leaf. just a little tiny bit. Go with a little more gray. I'll let that dry for a quick second. So it's easier to get a hang of it with just a little bit of practice, but kind of what I'm looking for when I'm letting it dry for a second is where it's shiny, it's wet, and where it's not shiny, it's dry. And when you pull a brush across something, you've got like grooves where it's thinner and thicker, and I want the thicker parts to still be shiny, but I want to see dry lines in between the shiny bits. Otherwise, it's just going to be, I'm just going to get squish marks from it being too wet. So that's a thing that's kind of hard to translate through a camera, but let's see, I'm going to turn it this way. I kind of like this little blank tiny bit there, so I'm going to try to avoid that. Whoop, that bit. Just go like that. See what I get. All right, see what we got. Oh, and I pulled the leaf with it. Well, that's okay. All right, I like that. That's just going to blend it a little bit more. And then the trickiest bit, oh, you can see my head a little bit. Gonna, without gouging the plate. Get kind of those leaves and the brush strokes going in a different direction. I really enjoy. And I will probably wait until all of the shininess is gone from this plate, because if I drape it over a plaster form right now, it'll all smudge and squish. And I want to make sure I put all that work into getting those brush strokes, so I want to make sure to keep them. But I'm going to wipe this down for a second. Get my space clean again. Once I get my surface clean and move this plate, I'm going to move on to a different surface design technique. So I want to make sure if there are any questions, of course I can answer questions at the end too, but if there are any questions about this technique, put them in the chats or just unmute yourself.
Carina, do you want to just talk briefly about what you do with the slab to make it into a plate next? Did you do that already?
Yeah, I totally can do that. So I use plaster forms to shape my plates, and I can pull one over in a sec once I get this dry to show. But they're hump molds, so they're sort of rounded like this, and I lay the clay over it. And plaster is great if we're working with clay because it sucks in and holds a lot of moisture. So it can help things dry evenly and pretty quickly. Let me put a lid on. Let me go grab it. I have it just on the other end of my table. I'll show you. It was a long way around the table. So if you see it from the side, you can sort of see the shape of it. You have to be a little careful with plaster because clay shrinks as it dries. And if you leave clay wrapped around something and let it dry too much, it'll not have anywhere to go because this doesn't bend at all, and the clay will break itself. And if you come back the next day, you'll find your plate just with like a big crack sometimes the whole way through. So you want to be careful to put it on there and keep a close eye on how wet it is. Get my hands a little cleaner. I really like working with white clay because then I can just put more of my attention into the surface design. But it does mean I need to always keep an eye on how clean my hands are, so I don't leave marks on the clay. All right, let's see if this is, I think it actually is probably dry enough that I could just put it on the plaster right now. I have the plaster on a banding wheel that spins so that I can kind of easily see it from a couple different angles. Let me just peel this guy up. Just gonna approximate it. I'll move this here for a second. So I like to sort of, I'm gonna get off my chair here, spin it and just make sure it's kind of approximately centered. I'm gonna maybe do like a slight adjustment. We gotta pick it up the whole way to do that. There we go. And then you want your clay wet enough that you can really bend and mold it. So one of the things that's on my long-term list that I haven't gotten around to yet is developing and creating a larger plate. And if I went much larger than this, so these plates, I don't put any kind of foot ring on the bottom of, I just keep it a flat plate. But if you go much larger, you can sometimes need a foot ring just to sort of support the shape of your piece so it doesn't warp too much in the kiln. So that's the basic idea. Later I'll go through and really, I don't know if you can see in the camera, I've got the texture of the canvas from rolling it out on here. So I'm going to smooth it out and really compress it. And then the edges can get finished later, but this kind of plate needs a fair bit of compression so that it doesn't risk cracking in the kiln. Because when you roll out a slab, you're kind of stretching it. You're not really compressing it, and there's a lot of chances for cracking in ceramics, and anything you can do to really compact the particles of clay together is going to help quite a bit. Any questions about that?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Do you prefer, or I should say, why do you prefer plaster slump molds over bisque slump molds?
That's a good question. I have not actually experimented a ton with bisque molds. Plaster is sort of what I learned on, and it always worked well for me. I have used, bisque molds can be really fun if you want a more detailed form. Sometimes I've messed around with like throwing something. For anyone who may not know, bisque is when you like take clay and you fire it once to a low temperature, so it's still really porous. So it can do the same thing as the plaster. It can soak up a lot of moisture. I've made pieces out of clay and then carved a lot of detail into them and used them as a press mold to like press clay into, and then you can get really interesting textures. Because I'm just like looking for a really basic smooth form, the plaster works really well for me. But bisque can be equally nice. All right, I'm gonna move this aside. All right. Okay, I think if there aren't any more questions, I think I'll move on to some of my textured stuff. Of course, questions don't have to be in order. Yeah, whatever questions you want, whenever. But I've more recently been having a really fun time with some pieces that don't have any color on them at all. This is just the basic color of the clay with a clear glaze over it. and these sort of textures carved into them. These are all hand built, these pieces. This one's like more of a, it's kind of hard to capture, I guess, on the phone. It's kind of a dimply, like almost like golf ball texture, except for it's a lot less pattern-like. It's a little bit more random than that. But so after I developed that sort of mono print style, I was having a really good time with it, but thinking about how I could mess around with texture, because a lot of my favorite mugs that I own by other artists are ones that are just really, really fun to touch, and thinking about what that adds to a cup experience to just have really interesting or satisfying textures. So I started messing around first with just throwing mugs like before and carving into them. So that's what I did for a while. This dimple texture, these are two of my favorite tools. Just like a metal tool with a like ball end on either side. These rubber bands are just so that it doesn't hurt my hand when I'm using this tool a lot. Just needed a little bit of a grip there. But this is what I used originally for this dimply texture. And then I've got this carving tool. Let's see if you can, need a darker surface. Can you see? So it's like a little wire V shape. I like a carving tool that really pulls the clay out so that you're not smashing the clay, you're removing it. And this is the tool that I originally used for this texture. And when I was just like doing it for fun in my own house, watching TV and making a mug for myself, like this was a very perfectly fine, relaxing thing to do. But the minute that I tried to think about making these to sell, the amount of hours it takes to carve out every single one of these, there's just like no way that you could make a mug that your average person would pay for with the amount of hours that was going into it. And, you know, even more when you get into these bigger mugs, like each one of these dimples is a little push. And so I started thinking about how I could create my own tools that would create these textures in a way that still looked really handmade and organic, but that was a little expedited. These are hand built and they take more work. So they're a more expensive mug anyways, even without doing the texture by hand. So what I looked into a lot of different ways that other artists were creating texture stamps or rollers, and there's so many beautiful ways to do it. Michelle, do you mind actually changing this to my face for a little bit? Just because I'm not really doing anything with my hands. Feels weird.
There's also a question up in chat. You want me to read it, or you got it?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So questions in from Carolyn. Have you played much? Have you played much with convex sculptural elements on any of your batches? And agreed, texture is fun. That's the t-shirt we need.
That is a really good question. And I actually really haven't that much. I have some pieces by other artists who do that. But that was a lot of what I was thinking about when I was thinking about how I could create a tool for this, because most artists who are creating like rolling texture mats of some sort are creating textures that pop out. So, and because I was trying to replicate the carved look, I was looking for something different. So Carolyn, some of the artists that I were looking at, they were creating these like clay, like not tubes, but like cylinders that they were carving into and then rolling across their clay, but that creates popped out textures. There's a lot of really cool artists who do that, but I couldn't, like that was going to give me the opposite of what I was looking for. So what I ended up doing is messing around with creating my own silicone texture mats that I could roll into the clay. Let me actually grab them so I can show you really fast. So this is a process that I've been working on, and it has more, it can definitely be developed into a more effective tool over time. There's more experimenting to be done, but you can just, there, it's focusing, I think. So these are just like textured mats that they pop out so that when I roll them into the clay, I get that indented look that I'm looking for. I've got the other one here. Tip, I didn't realize that this one was being stored folded. Don't store them folded. Got to make this, but this is a good excuse for me to make it again because I have ideas in my mind for how to make them better next time. But basically what I mess around with is I just like take a big flat rolled out slab of clay and I take the time to do that by hand texture into a big slab of clay, and then build a like little wood frame around it. And then this is the silicone that I've been using. There's so many different kinds, and I'm sure that I could experiment and find others that work too, but Mold Right is what I've been using, and it's just a two-part thing that you mix the base in with the catalyst, and then you have some time to work with it. So it's nice because it just cures over a few hours at room temperature, but basically you just pour that into whatever indented shapes you've created and let it sit there, and then you get these texture mats, and I'll show you how I roll them into clay in a second. But basically I'm rolling into slabs and I'm hand building it. And this has been a really interesting process to learn about. You probably actually can't see because of the focus. There's a couple places where I get air bubbles. It's not too big of a problem, but where there's an air bubble, sometimes I have to go back into the finished mug and like just clean it up here and there. But it's so much less work than carving every single one by hand, which when I first started doing this, a couple people were like, those look really awesome, but like, you've got to find a better way to do that. And at first I was like, no, I don't. It's just fun and it's meditative and I like it. And that is how I felt until I was trying to do them in mass. And then I was like, actually, you're all right. I really do need to come up with a better way to do this. So I've been using these texture mats and just thought like, I'll experiment on my next round of ideas once they wear out. And last night I discovered that I'm at that point. So I have experimenting to do ahead of me, but I recently learned that my workplace owns a vacuum machine. And I think I can make the air bubble issue better by, after I mix the silicone together, putting it in the vacuum machine for a couple minutes to pull out, just to sort of de-air the silicone before I pour it. I think will help a little bit. And there's also some additives that you can buy that thin the silicone a little bit that may decrease their strength a little, but will also sort of help fill in all of those textures with as much detail as possible. So a couple things to mess around with, but this has been a really fun, this is also like a really small one. This makes one mug. I put it on some clay and I roll it out with a rolling pin, and I do one at a time. But the next time I do it, now that I know that it works, I think I'm going to just do like a really big one that I can put through a slab roller over my slab and just get a big slab of textured clay that I can make mini mugs out of. Is sort of the next step for these. They're definitely a work in progress still. I'm gonna turn this. All right, Michelle, if you want to move it back to my hands again, I'm gonna go grab a slab of clay. I'm just gonna kind of show really quick how I roll it out, because I think it's kind of a fun process.
Carina, do you see that comment in the chat from Debbie?
I didn't.
Yeah. In science, there is stuff called anti-bubble that will help keep bubbles out of your agar plates, which is a science thing, clearly.
We might have to chat after hours about that. That sounds like it could be useful to me.
Yeah.
I'm very interested to learn more about that. One thing that I think is so interesting about working with clay, especially if you have a vision for something, but you don't know how to get there, and what you're doing is just sort of experimenting over time to get closer to your vision, is that I always simultaneously feel like an expert and a novice at the same time. There's always so much to learn and always ways to make your process better. So that is an exciting tip to me. All right, I've got my slab of clay here. You can tell this is an expedited process from what it was before, but it could still be way more expedited as I learn more. And move a couple things out of my way. All right, this looks like a kitchen rolling pin, and it is, but I use it specifically for clay. I'm an advocate for keeping your clay tools and your kitchen tools separate. Just want to make sure to say that out loud. All right, so all I'm really doing is just like slowly pushing it in. And then I've got this like really fun texture that looks, it's all pushed in and carved in the way that I like it. So it just takes a couple, you've got to carve the clay the way you want it to look and then take a mold of that so that you can put it back into clay. And I just have a template that I use. Probably, I'm not gonna like make a whole mug in front of us because that takes a really long time, but these are hand-built mugs that I cut a rectangle out of and am forming it into a hand, like a hand-built mug. You can see on these guys, the seam is right here for where I make them. But this has been a really fun process that's clearly still in evolution, but has been a really fun one for me to experiment with a little bit. Any more questions about this process? All right, well, maybe I'll set these aside. I have one more surface design process that I want to show you that's even less in development, that I've just been experimenting with more lately, but that I've been having a really good time with. And then after that, I'm happy to open it up to more questions, or I also can do a handle demo if people want to see that. I know I'm always keen to see how other people make their handles, but we'll get to that in a minute. Let me put this aside. I'm going to make a mug out of this later tonight. Kind of wasting class. Okay. So the first two things that I was sharing today were both on unfired wet clay, which is, I think, in general, really nice stage for decorating, because you've got that sort of malleable stickiness to the clay that helps grab a lot of underglaze. But there are some things where having a fired bisqued mug can be really nice too. So this, I've got a raw bisqued mug here. There's no glaze on it, but it's hard and non-squishable. And one thing that I have been messing around with a little bit lately is transferring drawings onto clay, which has been really fun. And I started doing that mainly as gifts. I was transferring drawings that kids were doing onto like a plate as a memento for a parent. My sister might be on here. I started doing it for my nephews when they were really little, and that was really fun. And then lately I've been trying to get back into a drawing practice a little bit personally. And that's been an interesting journey for me. When I left painting for ceramics years and years ago, I sort of left all 2D work for a really long time. And it's only been maybe the last year or two that I've kind of thought like, maybe I'll get back into that a little bit in a really informal way. And so I've just been like messing around with some doodling. And it's been really fun to just start to experiment a little bit with putting like my own little doodles onto clay or plates. So I'm going to show you how I do that. Well, this is totally different, but it's also just been a really fun new experiment for me that I've been really enjoying. But for that, I need a pencil, and I do not know where I put my pencil. Hang on one moment. I really thought that I had my table perfectly organized for this demo, but in hindsight, that's not really possible. All right. So I have these two little doodles. I woke up this morning and I was kind of nervous for this afternoon, and I was haven't been feeling the best lately. And so I made these two little doodles about, this one says, this rash is causing me stress. And this one says, this stress is causing my rash. So I'm gonna put one on either side of this mug. And I'm gonna, I think, just put the pictures on for now, and I might put the words on later. But then one thing that's really nice about transferring stuff onto bisqueware is that any marks you put on here in pencil will burn out and you won't see them. So you can sketch on a mug really easily, or I'm just going to use pencil to transfer. So I don't want the pictures to go on backwards. So I'm just going to color over my whole drawing. And I'm using, you can get away with different types of pencils, but this is a 6B drawing pencil. And for those of you who don't use drawing pencils very often, whoa, I'm sorry, I'm really shaking everything. The pencils with a B, 2B, 4B, 6B, are the ones with a softer lead. And the higher the number, the softer the lead. And so it just makes it really easy to transfer. So no need to color the whole. If I'm making anyone nauseous, just close your eyes for a second. I'm almost done. Okay. The shaking is done. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it this way and put this doodle of myself wherever I want it. And then I'm going to hold it in place and just draw over my lines with a pen. And it doesn't have to be a pen, but any kind of hard stylus, because basically wherever you put pressure, you're going to transfer that pencil mark onto the mug. And then I'm going to trace that with something that will not burn out in the kiln, but that'll just give me a nice reference. So I'm going to put myself right here. I'm probably not going to add in all the details, just enough to get me sort of a good sense of where I am. Probably not going to draw in my face I can freehand that. All right, get my other arm in there. My arm that's holding a mirror. And my yoga pants. This is the outfit I was wearing yesterday. Foot, foot. And all right, see what we got here. So it might be a little hard to see if I can get it to focus on it. Yeah, so you can see it. All these pencil lines will burn out later, but that's just going to give me a good reference point when I actually draw on it. Let's see, here it is. So this is what I have been using to draw on my clay. There's a lot of different things that you can use, but this is by Mako. It's called Designer Liner, and it's just like a similar to an underglaze, like what I use for all of my other stuff, but it's just thickened in such a way that it lays really nicely onto the clay. And it also leaves, like it stays it's a raised line. So there's a little bit of texture on the mug, which I also like. Pull up the pin. All right, let me see. I always just like to check. Beforehand, so I don't start with a big blurb. There we go. So I like to start from, I'm right-handed, so I just make sure to start from the top left and go down so that my hand isn't gonna smudge anything, because until it's fired, it's not permanent. It can all squish and smudge. So I'm probably not gonna do this whole thing because you would just be watching me quietly. Also, that might be a sound that bothers some people. I really, for some reason, love a scratchy chalkboard kind of sound, but I know that's not for everyone. So I didn't put a face in, but I think I can kind of just freehand a face. I think worried faces are pretty easy. So I could go on for a while, but you can see once it's fired, you'll only see that dark line. And this particular product, so you want to let it dry really well, because I'm going to dip this in a clear glaze before I fire it. So the black will be raw, but really dry, and I'll dip in a clear glaze, and then it will just be fired one more time. But yeah, most of this has been like kid doodles that I have done for friends and stuff, but it's been fun to sort of start to experiment with putting my own doodles on pots too.
Carina, did you try other drawing materials, like ceramic drawing materials, before you landed on this one?
So this is a new enough process to me that I haven't done a lot of experimenting yet. This is actually the first product that I used, but I am curious to try some others as well. This one has worked well for me, and it does come in multiple colors also, though as you know from a lot of my work, I really like black and white, but it does come in other colors as well. So it is actually the first one that I used, but I know that there are others, and probably if I get into this more, I think there are probably cheaper versions than buying small bottles of pre-made stuff. But I don't know if anyone else has used other things. I would be really curious to hear about it, because it's on my list to look up and experiment with other things. Debbie, it was so nice to have you. But yeah,
I've tried underglaze pencils before, but if you have any texture on your bisque surface, it's going to pick it up, which some people care about, but you might not. Yeah.
Underglaze, I don't know if anyone else has used underglaze pencils. I've used them a little bit. They have like a nice sketchy texture to them. I have personally a really hard time with the sound that an underglaze pencil makes when drawing on bisque. This sound I don't mind at all, but that sound, like, I have to like really amp myself up for, like, tonight I have to use underglaze pencils. I have to like really be ready for it. But also they're really beautiful, and I have actually like this piece right here. This like giant guy. This like giant thing. This has a lot of like, all those vertical lines are underglaze pencils because they have a really nice like sketchy charcoaly texture to them. That that is cat hair that I really love. But that could be fun. All right, well, here, can we change it back to my face again, please, Michelle? Those were the 3 techniques that I was excited to share about today. I'm happy to answer more questions. I'm also happy to do a handle demo if people are interested in that. We have the time. I am curious what people are interested in. What do you think, Michelle?
I would definitely like to see how you make handles. I always think it's, like you said, good to see other techniques. And some people on the call may not have ever seen a handle before.
That is true. Every
Joyce would like to see handles as well.
It's really interesting. Every artist has like their own handle style they settle into, and I think once you start either making mugs or collecting mugs, you'll start to realize that every handle feels really different, and it can take a long time, I think, for people to find their style. Let me grab some clay. I always like to measure out my handle, the amount of clay, pretty precisely. Just get my scale out really quick. One of the reasons I always like doing handle demos is because I really struggled for a long time to come up with a style of handle that I both liked, thought looked good on my pots, and also that I could make. Like, I saw lots of handles other people did that I liked, but couldn't figure out how to do them myself. And what I sort of ended up doing was just asking artists whose handles I really liked if they would like do a demo so I could see, and I kind of ended up piecing together ways a few different artists made their handles as I was trying to come up with my own style. And so I always feel like it's really nice to share that. All right. I think maybe back to my hands, probably, Michelle. Thank you. All right, so I measured out 1.5 ounces, but it really depends. I make different sizes of cups. So that is going to vary from cup to cup, obviously. And I'll put it on this. That guy's been sitting here waiting. So when I'm looking at handles that I personally really like, I like a handle that has like it's chunkier at the connection points than it is everywhere else. In my mind, that not only is a little bit sturdier because there's a bigger connection point, but it also just looks sturdier. And something about a mug that looks really dainty is harder to use in everyday life. You totally can, but if you feel nervous about using your mug, you're just going to use it less. And I think any artist who makes mugs is just really, what they love is seeing people using them. And so something that looks sturdy but doesn't feel super heavy and chunky is what I'm going for. So that kind of bigger attachment point, but still something small enough that it fits nicely in your hand. So when I'm making my mugs, I start with a ball, and then I'm going to slowly pinch it out into like a little bit of a log shape. But as I go, I'm always keeping the two ends a little bit more bulby. And I'm going to just turn and pinch kind of as I go. So I'm going for something that hopefully over time is going to be a similar thickness throughout here, but a little bulbier at the ends.
Reminds me of one of those weird candy circus peanuts. You know those?
It does.
The
yes.
Ones?
Like the orange squishy gummy candies.
Yeah.
Maybe feels a little bit like that too. So right now, everything is still like round this way, and we'll eventually change that shape. Handles are really interesting. A lot of artists approach them pretty differently. Most artists are looking for some balance between I love the way it looks and I love the way that it feels. And sometimes a handle that feels really nice may not really be your aesthetic style, and vice versa. And so some artists put all of their eggs in the like, it needs to fit my aesthetic style, or I only care about how it feels in the hand. And most people fall somewhere in between those two. But I think that's one of the reasons why it can be really tricky to find your style, is you're also just sort of weighing what are my personal priorities when I'm like making a mug. So here we go. Looks kind of like a little dog treat or something. I find that a perfectly round handle doesn't feel very natural in my hand. I really like a handle that has a sort of an almond shape. So you can see like on this one, it's like fairly skinny on the edge on either side, but it's actually got like a nice amount of thickness through the middle. So it's kind of an almondy shape. So my handles end up being sort of sculpted for a lot of it and then smoothed out later to look a little bit more like a pulled handle. So I sculpt because I like to control exactly how it looks. So I'm going to use my pointers and my thumbs like this to pinch all along the way and to sort of give it that almondish shape. So I'm going to start at the base. So you can see I just kind of like pinched it there to start to make that shape on the edge. I'm going to do that on both sides. And then I'm going to use those same fingers and just sort of inch down the handle. I'm going to go about halfway down. And I'm going to turn and do the same thing from the other side. So I am at once starting to get the shape that I want around, but also starting to give it some length and starting to give it that sort of curved shape too. That curved shape just kind of happens naturally, but it also creates this ridge that I don't really like. So I'm gonna just do a gentle pinch from the middle out. And as I do that, pinching that ridge away, I'm also just gonna continue that curved shape. Then I'm gonna do the same thing again. I'm gonna start here. I'm gonna pinch that almond shape again, and this is gonna kind of give me some more length. I've had people describe my my handle making style as a bit micromanagey. That it's just like very, some people's handles are a little less finicky than mine, but I am really picky about my handles. So I like to think that I'm putting all of my micromanaging energy into my mugs and not the people that I manage at work. So anytime that I get like little tiny cracks, I'm just gonna smooth those out. They're not gonna cause me any problems, but they can grow if you don't kind of keep them smoothed out. All right, so I like to kind of set them here so that I can start to see the profile of my handle, but I'll turn it this way so you can see it's starting to look like that. Actually, I should probably just put this blanket back out so I can let it sit there. Start to see like, yeah, it's about as big of a handle as I want. I actually think that, I don't usually have it in a perfect symmetrical C. I'll often sort of like the bottom, it'll look a little bit more ear shaped, but not extremely so, but just a little bit. I'm gonna kind of even it out a little bit. I don't love a handle that goes too high up or too far out. For me, a handle that goes too far out just like is more likely to get bumped and nicked. And if you go, sometimes people's instinct is to go really high up, but then your mugs don't stack, and that doesn't bother everyone, but I want my mugs to be able to fit neatly because I have a giant mug collection, and there's no room for mugs that can't pack tightly with all my other mugs. So I'm gonna put my handle like right about, I want my image to be centered. So I'm gonna put my handle right about here. And then I'm gonna kind of place it about where I want it to be. I'll look at it from the side. I'll actually pull this down a little bit. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. It's pretty centered. I'm gonna grab this needle tool and get like a little quick trace. Not too exact, but just to give me an idea of where I'm gonna flip and score. All right. Somewhere I have a tool that scratches more than one scratch at a time, but it is not in my eyesight at the moment. So we'll go with the needle tool. Get the nice in. And you can see it's kind of a surprisingly large amount of space for what feels in a lot of ways like a fairly dainty thin handle, but like that's a big chunky amount of space to be scratching, but that's kind of what I'm going for, that really big connection point. I'm gonna do the same thing here. Actually, sometimes I like to just like tap it in the middle a little bit to get kind of a little bit of a curved shape, since the mug is gonna be, the mug is curved also. All right. One thing that I really like in my own handles that is purely an aesthetic choice is I really like that the connection point between the handle and the mug is visible. You can see that seam. Some artists like to smooth that over and make that transition really, really smooth. And both ways are 100% fine. It's just an aesthetic choice. But if you're not smoothing over that connection point, you have to be extra, extra certain that your connection is really good to avoid cracking in that spot. So I put, you know, a moment or two into really getting things well scored on all surfaces. Usually I use slip. It's also not within eyesight, so I'm just going to use some water, which honestly is usually fine if you're connecting things really well. But slip is better. All right, I'm going to line things up a little bit. And I like to make sure not to be pushing down on my handle until I have a hand supporting on the inside. Otherwise, you're just going to kind of squish your mug into sort of an oval shape. I'm doing a little bit more like pinching to get that connection point really good. I tapped it to sort of get the handle curved a little, but it's not quite as curved as the curve on my pot. So I am like pinching it to like really elongate it a tiny bit on the edges just to get it really connected everywhere that I can. Do the same thing up here. All right, so you can see there, this is like the easiest point to just like make any slight, like if I want a little bit more arch right there, everything is still wet enough that I can kind of make some of these slight adjustments. And then usually what I do, I'm just gonna speed up my process for you a little bit. Usually I'll cover this and let it sit for a day before I do my next step, just to get the mug and the handle at a similar moisture level. But we're not gonna wait a day. I'm just gonna show you the last part of this step for me. So I'm gonna get the handle and my fingers pretty wet. So right now you can see a lot of the like pinching from me sculpting it. But so I'm just getting this wet, and then what I'm gonna do, see if I can, I'm just kind of like pulling my hands back and forth along it with just a little pressure. You don't want so much pressure that you're gonna be changing the shape of the handle a bunch. And this is, there are two main reasons why I wait like a day usually to do this. One is that this handle is firmed up enough so I won't accidentally misshape it. It's easier to misshape it when the clay is still really wet. And the other thing is that it allows the connection point between the mug and the handle to set. If you pull too hard on it, you could pull the handle off of the mug right now. And that's something that you will not have to worry about so much if you wait like 24 hours with the mug covered under plastic. So I'm just sort of, this is, you know, I keep saying this is purely aesthetic, but literally every step is an aesthetic decision about what you like and don't like in a mug. And then I'm gonna just use like the pinchy part of my fingers to just go along the edge and really clean it up and give it a nice little edge there. And then one of my other favorite tools, this like rubber stylus, is a really nice, since I like that seam showing, I'm just gonna go around every seam with a pointed edge, and it just really cleans up that line. It sort of compresses the connection at the same time that it leaves that seam there, so that I have like that really nice, clean, but visible seam everywhere between the handle and the mug. And then, so that's kind of a speeded up version, but that's sort of how I do my handles. And it is definitely a sort of Frankenstein of like 3 other artists' ways of doing handles, till I could find one that worked really well for me, that I also could do. There was lots that I liked, but couldn't figure out how to do for myself on my own pot. So there we go. Printed and handled in one sitting. That is really all that I have for today. Does anyone have any other questions about the handles or anything you saw today, or I mean, anything?
Do you have a favorite out of your techniques?
That's an interesting question. I feel like I always have a favorite, but that favorite is always changing. I do really enjoy the mono printing, and especially I really enjoy mono printing like the bigger plates and platters, where you can really think about the layers and like zoom out of it a little bit more like a painting. That's one thing that I really like doing. And I don't get to do those as often because the bigger things don't sell as frequently as the small things. But yeah, those are really fun to do. But I also think it's easy to, whichever process is the one that you're not working on, for that one to be your favorite, like the one that you aren't doing but wish you were doing. I feel like it's often where we find ourselves.
That's fair. And you do both of these. Well, you do the dimpled texture and the brushwork on your earrings, at least the ones I've seen.
Oh,
right?
Yeah. So I've been kind of more recently getting into a little bit of jewelry, and it's been fun to take some of my surface design for my pots and do them on smaller things. So actually, these guys that I'm wearing right now are that same like printed style, just on a little earring. So it's fun when you're usually working pretty big to zoom in and work on a really tiny scale sometimes. And yeah, I have some of the sort of dimpled textured jewelry up on the sale as well. That's been fun too. This has been so fun. Michelle, thank you for having me. I don't get to do stuff like this very often. So I'm glad for everyone who came, and I appreciate everything that Union Project did to set this up too.
Thanks, Carina. Yeah, thank you, Carina, for, sorry, is there a question? Thought I heard somebody pop up a question. No?
I think I might have just heard a weird echo for a second.
You, I think, have such an ease and a grace about you in your studio. It's always a sheer joy to watch. So I'm really appreciative to just get a break on a Sunday and kind of kick back and watch you do your creative work. So thank you. And then, of course, I would like to one more time thank our sponsors and funders, the Fine Foundation, Bridgeway Capital, the Creative Business Accelerator, Simpson and McCready, and of course, Standard Ceramic Supply. And Union Project is a rad asset, so we are supported by the Allegheny Regional Asset District. We are really appreciative of all of them. And then I would just encourage everyone to follow Carina if you're not already on Instagram. It's the best way to find out what artists are doing right up to the minute. Her handle is at Carina Kooiman. And then you can check out the full listing of programming for the Mother of All Pottery sales on our website, which includes a link to the online shop, which does feature Carina's work. The direct link to that shop is union-project.square.site. And if you enjoyed this today and you would like to help more of these kinds of programs happen, your support would really help us do that. You can make a donation if you are so moved at unionproject.org/support. I think that is all I have. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. I just also want to add that I always love chatting. So if never hesitate to reach out, through Instagram or whatever, if you have questions or follow-ups. I'm always happy to talk about ceramics or anything. So.
Awesome. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye, folks.